In working with some of my customers that use VRED, I've been listening to them and observing them, and a lot of them are expert users, but everyone seems to have some skill gaps. And so I thought I would make a few basic videos to show some tools in VRED. This one is going to be about how to finesse the camera. I always like this part of my job because there is an art to it, and you have some creative control. You can try this yourself. I'm just using a modified version of the example scene, and you can find it under File, Open Examples, and then find the VPV file called Automotive Genesis. In my case, I did a motion path animation in Maya and brought it in. You can see it's baked on every frame here, and as I scrub through the timeline, I have the car following a curve. Now when you animate, you always want to make sure you have the correct frames per second set before you begin in your preferences. And there's a shortcut by clicking on this wrench icon. I like to use 30 frames per second. And always be where you want to set your key in time. So I'll go to 0 and have the node selected that you want to set animation keys on. In this case, it will be the perspective camera. Now I'm just going to frame my view, and I'll have it so that the car is just starting to drive into my frame. And there's a key all button here. I'm not going to worry about which of all these animatable channels are changing at this point. I'm just going to make a keyframe, which is this little dot, for every single one of them. And then I'll go to the end of my car driving animation around 250, and again frame where I want my car to land. And I'll set the key again. And since I don't need all these channels that are straight lines or do not have any value changing, I can just get rid of them by right-clicking and going to Remove Constant Curves. Usually you'll be left with X, Y, and Z rotation and translation curves. So when I scrub in my playback, I see that the car does go out of frame, and so I do need to correct that. So to determine which of these attributes is controlling what, you can go to your camera editor, and under viewing there are columns for X, Y, and Z, translate, and rotate. And you can scrub in any of these to see what they control. And don't worry about messing it up. Since we set keys, I can just scrub back to that frame in time, which is around 175 when it goes out of frame, and determine which of these I want to use to correct that. So I want to change the rotation Z. And sometimes you'll want to insert keys as mid keys, and sometimes just changing the tangency will affect everything in the middle of those keyframes. So going to rotation Z, I'm going to change the end key to flat. And when I scrub through again, it's looking a little better. And where my problem area is, I can even drag here in my curve editor to see live. It's changing my key. So I'm going to keep it in frame somewhere around there. All right, so now my car is driving and it's going a bit farther than I would like. So I'm going to instead go to that 175 where it's looking pretty good, and I will select and say key selected. And whatever you see in this curve is what you're going to get. If it looks wonky, it's going to not be fluid animation. So you want to correct that. You can see how the different tangencies look. And you can also drag the arrows manually. So I'm going to keep the end one flat. Take a look at what we've got. The car stays in frame a bit better. It's not ending up quite where I want, so I'm just going to go to that last frame and drag it up a bit. change my tangency. And you'll have to keep going back and forth and playing around to see what you end up with. So once you're happy with that, in this case I don't want my camera animation to end at the same time my car stops moving. So I'm going to go forward in time to 3:30 and move that last keyframe there. Instead of dragging it, it's more precise if you type in the value, which is another way to change things. So my car stops moving, but the camera still decelerates to a stop. So let's play the whole animation and see what it's looking like. So again, you can play around and try different things, and keep in mind that the playback speed may or may not be your final movie speed depending on your hardware. So you'll always want to output a movie and check that as the real master for the timing. In this scene, I have another camera. It's an aim camera. You can create one by going to your camera editor and saying create camera with aim. It comes with two parts. One is kind of like the body of the camera where it's located in space, and the other is the aim node. You can see where it's aiming by turning on show cameras under view. And if you want to move the location of where it's aiming, then you can do that by manipulating with your transform manipulator. So I've already separated the two nodes by grouping the aim under the moving part of the car. And when I scrub in the timeline, you'll see that looking through the perspective camera, that aim is always connected to around the center of my vehicle. If I look through this aim camera by clicking on it, even as my vehicle is going along that motion path, it's always aimed at the center of that vehicle. I can also move that body or location part of the camera into the same hierarchy where the aim is, just by dragging it into there. And it should follow the motion path animation or whatever animation it's dragged into. Let me just click on my car and hit F to frame it, and I'm going to follow behind, so I'll just look through around the rear. And now as I scrub through my scene, as the car drives along this motion path, I'm always looking at the center of the car, and the camera is following behind it because both nodes of the aim camera are grouped under the node that has animation in the vehicle.